Thank you everyone for attending our talk today. We're very excited for our 8th annual Gaines Lecture Series, especially the weekend before what would have been the Mount Zion Cemetery cleaning. The Ernest J. Gaines Center is an international research center, which is located in Louisiana, focused on the work of Dr. Ernest J. Gaines, an internationally acclaimed African-American author who focused on South Louisiana and Southern Louisiana Blackness. We are honored today to have Dr. Richard Yarborough from the University of California in LA as our guest speaker. Dr. Yarborough is a professor of English in the African-American literature and a faculty research associate with the Ralph J. Bunche Center for African-American Studies at the University of California in Los Angeles. And he is also the editor of the Heath Anthology for American Literature. So thank you so much, Dr. Yarborough, for being with us. And we're very excited for your talk. And I turn it over to you.
Thank you very much. First, let me say hello from California. I want to express how grateful I am at being able to share some ideas with you today. This is both a sobering occasion in light of Ernest Gaines's passing a year ago, but also an opportunity to celebrate Ernest Gaines and his remarkable work. I only regret that I cannot be there in person. Before I get started, I want to express my deep appreciation to Shailene Woods with the Ernest J. Gaines Center, who invited me to participate in this event. Her help in carrying this off has been invaluable. I want to begin by talking about the importance of Ernest Gaines for me personally. Afterwards, I'll share some observations about Gaines's work, and in particular, about how much it can offer us in this particular historical moment. Gaines's fiction played a special role in my academic career, and thereby in the professional journey that led me to be speaking here with you today. While I was growing up, I was fascinated with science, computers, very early computers then, electronics and things like that. So I selected engineering as my major when I entered college in the fall of 1969. Turned out to be not a very wise choice of major. I discovered that really quickly. This was an especially traumatic period in American history. My first year in college coincided with the shooting of the students at Kent State and Jackson State universities, with nationwide protests against the Vietnam War, with widespread racial conflicts, exacerbated by the government's crackdown on radical movements. It was a time of great turmoil, in other words. By my graduation, I had switched my major to English with an emphasis on creative writing, thinking that I might want to pursue a career in higher education, but also toying with the idea of trying to become a novelist. I entered the graduate program at Stanford University in 1973. I was extremely naive regarding what getting a PhD involved. I had no idea what research focus I might choose. I somehow survived most of that first year there, but I was still at a loss by the spring regarding a possible field of concentration. I had no clue. In that spring, and this would have been 1980, I enrolled in a seminar on American fiction taught by a professor who was visiting from his regular position at San Francisco State University. Early on, he pulled me aside and he suggested that I might be interested in a book on the assigned reading list titled The Autobiography of Miss Jane Pittman by a Bay Area writer named Ernest Gaines. Now, I had heard of neither the book nor the author. My exposure to African-American literature by that point had been really limited. I mean, my parents had books by James Baldwin and I think maybe Chester Himes, a few other people at home, but I'd never taken a course in the subject. Black authors weren't covered at all in my high school classes, and only a few were starting to show up in college courses. Needless to say, the autobiography of Miss Jane Pittman turned out to have a profound impact on me. Born and raised in the Philadelphia area, I had visited relatives in Virginia while growing up, but that's as far south I had been. I'd never been to Louisiana or even thought much about it. Gaines in that book made the region come alive in a vivid fashion that just startled me. I was also struck by the accessibility of his prose, how straightforward his language was, by his skill with vocal rhythms, in other words, the pacing of how people spoke, and conceptually by his grasp of history, and especially of the complex nature of historical change. And that's a topic I will come back to later on. I became a Gaines fan for life. I mean, no question. My encounter with his fiction was so important because it encouraged me to focus my research and teaching on African-American literature. Who knows when I might have made that decision if I had not encountered Miss Jane Pittman in the spring of my first year. Looking back, it's an interesting coincidence that I was in the graduate program at Stanford, where Ernest Gaines sharpened his fiction writing skills in the late 1950s. And it later occurred to me that the professor who urged me to focus on the autobiography of Miss Jane Pittman, that professor may well have known Ernest Gaines from his time at San Francisco State, where the professor taught. It never occurred to me to follow up and ask about that possible connection. Regardless, I will be forever grateful to have read Gaines's fiction when I did. I might not even be here if that hadn't happened. My first contact with Ernest Gaines himself occurred in the mid-1970s. I was still in graduate school at Stanford, and my advisor, who was a specialist in African-American literature, had invited Gaines to come to campus. And it gave me my first chance to listen to him read and to interact with him a bit, to talk to him a little bit. I was immediately struck by how special of a reader of his own fiction he is. I hope that you all have had an opportunity to listen to him read. Not all authors are really powerful readers of their own work. Ernest Gaines was. And in his responses to the questions from the audience, he came across as exceedingly thoughtful, down to earth, direct, and very, very, very committed to his craft. I also recall that as my advisor and I walked him to his car, he and the novelist Ishmael Reed, who was also on campus that afternoon, they got into a lively discussion about boxing. So it became, the references to Joe Louis in Gaines's work are not accidental. It's a topic that Ishmael Reed and Gaines both cared a lot about. Since that time, Gaines has remained an important presence in my career. I published my first book review on In My Father's House in 1979. At the time, it really kind of gave me the sense that maybe I had something to say as a scholar. I've taught Gaines's fiction numerous times over my roughly, 40 years at UCLA now. I participated in the Louisiana Public Broadcasting documentary on his life, which gave me the wonderful opportunity in the early 1990s to visit the region about which he wrote so powerfully. And then in 2016, I spent a week in Lafayette at a summer institute focused on Gaines's work. Needless to say, I was gratified and humbled to be asked to return to Lafayette, even if via webcam, to help memorialize his life and his writing. I should add that as I prepared for my presentation today, I kept running into odd coincidences, possible links between Gaines or aspects of his work and things that I was interested in. The one that I will highlight, because it's the most striking coincidence that occurred, took place about a month ago. I'm teaching a course on African-American literature at UCLA, and I received an email from a student in that class. She asked me if I would consider working with her on her honors project. Not only is her honors project on Miss Jane Pittman, but it turns out that the student is Ernest Gaines's niece. I can't explain these kinds of connections. I guess it just means that things will always come around, and certain things are meant to be. One of the results of my immersion in Ernest Gaines's fiction over the past several months, because I just decided I want to reread all of it. I just want to sit down and plow through the fiction. I read a lot of interviews with Ernest Gaines preparing for this, and it was a wonderful experience. And one of the things that was the result is that my appreciation for his abilities as a writer is even greater, if that's possible. It is just extraordinary to encounter text after text where the level of accomplished writing is so high. The biggest surprise for me, though, was perhaps his first novel, Catherine Carmier. I had remembered the plot line from when I had read it, but I hadn't recalled how powerfully certain of the scenes in the book resonated with Gaines's control of dialogue and his ability to charge interpersonal interactions with great significance while keeping the language and the staging of those interactions fully grounded. One example is an exchange that takes place in that novel between Aunt Charlotte and Reverend Armstrong, her minister. And Reverend Armstrong is trying to help Aunt Charlotte make peace with the fact that her nephew, Jackson, the main character in the book, has decided not to move back home with her after being away several years. He's come to visit, but he's going to leave. And I want to share a portion of that. There's no way, given the power of Gaines's language, that I can give a presentation on Gaines without letting some of his work speak for itself. And this is a conversation between Aunt Charlotte and Reverend Armstrong. This is Gaines. Charlotte knew that Reverend Armstrong had come there for more than just a casual talk. And all the time they were talking about her health, the garden, the weather, she was anticipating the moment when he would turn to the main thing he had come there to talk about. A child returning home with a report card of nothing but D's and F's could not have dreaded this moment any more than she did. The moment came. You got to put yourself in my place, Reverend, she said. All my life, I ain't never had nothing, no kind of learning, no kind of nothing. Worked hard all my life for nobody but him. Look like I got that right. What right is that, Sister Charlotte? Not to talk to him? Is that the right you're speaking of? I held him when he was a little baby next to my bosom. His mom was in the field working, cutting cane. I held him skinny as he could be, holding him one hand and trying to cook with the other. I felt his little heart beat against my bosom. Remember how he used to grab a handful of my hair and all the time I'm trying to cook there. I just didn't born him, Reverend, that's all. I just didn't born him. I understand. Do you, Reverend, do you understand? I understand. Watched him grow up there, skinny as a weed. Watched him go to school, the first one to take him to church. Saw that he got religion, baptized. Now she became quiet, crying softly to herself. Reverend Armstrong waited patiently for a minute or two. I think before anything else you consider yourself a Christian, don't you, sister? Yes, sir, she said, but I got a heart. I understand, but your duty as a Christian. But I got a heart, Reverend sir, I got a heart. I know how much you must love him, but Mary must have loved Christ that much too. Don't you think so? She was silent. Don't you think so, Sister Charlotte? She loved him? She was silent, crying softly. He was silent a while too, looking at her. Sister Charlotte? He said, yes, sir. But she gave him up. Don't you think it was a hardship for her to bear? I got nothing, Reverend. You have him. And when you come down to it, ain't he the only one who count? She was silent, crying softly. Sister Charlotte? She looked at him. Reverend, you got two sons. You got two. How'd you feel if they were both took from you at once? I would lean on him. I would lean on him more. Reverend, look at my side. I am Sister Charlotte. I'm an old woman. I'm old. 2 more years, 3 more than most. I ain't never had a thing. Is that too much I'm asking for? Normally, I would say no. But when it starts blocking your duty as a Christian, I have to say it is. In this case, that's what it's doing, Sister Charlotte. I'm a Christian, Reverend, she said. I can't be nothing else but. I know that, I know, but the first thing a Christian must learn is sacrifice. And to be able to sacrifice the thing you like most is the truest test you can have. Reverend, I love my boy. That's all I want in this life, Reverend, to love him, to have him, Sister Charlotte, to have him. Yes, she said, yes, but this is not the Christian way. To love, not to love is, but to have, to possess. I'll never get in his way. I just want him here with me. I'll never get in his way. You can't have him here with you, Sister Charlotte. You must go back. And me, you must continue the work. The tears ran down her face. Continue, and how long? Reverend Armstrong was stuck for an answer. How long, Reverend? Until he calls, he said. She looked at him a moment and turned her head. The tears rolled down her face. Rendering this emotionally difficult conversation with that kind of subtlety and sensitivity manifest Gaines' really remarkable gifts, and also the hard work he invested in his writing. There is a lack of effort on occasion that comes because the writing is so evenly paced and so polished, but he had to work extremely hard. He constantly talked about the labor that he put into his writing. I thought I knew, as I was rereading these texts, I thought I knew A Lesson Before Dying pretty well. However, what struck me on my recent reading that I'd not registered before were things that resided on the margins or the fringes of the drama. One example is the Christmas pageant that Grant's teacher, local teacher, that Grant's students put on. Goes on for several pages, and it's really an amazing kind of set piece about the kids, how they're producing for the community that performance. And then there were sections of Jefferson's diary. And if you've read Lesson Before Dying, Jefferson is the young man who is in jail, and Grant has given him a journal to write in, a notebook. And toward the end of the novel, we get access to Jefferson's ideas in that diary, that journal. And there were sections of that journal that I just had to stop reading. I just had to stop and then just sit with that material for a bit. And I want to share one other section from Gaines's work with you, and that's a description of a character named Boo, whom Jefferson knew when he was growing up. And again, he's writing this in his own way, best way he can in the journal. And this is in Jefferson's voice in the jail cell. It looked like the Lord just worked for white folks, because ever since I wasn't nothing but a little boy, I've been on my own hauling water to the field on that old water cart with all them dime buckets and that dipper, just hitting old Dorothy, just trotting, and me up there hitting her with that rope, and all them dime buckets and that dipper just hitting against that barrel of water, so I can get the people their food and their water on time, and the people see me and drop their hoe and come and get their bucket because they know they string or their mark on top. And Boo's sitting under a bloodweed with his white beans and rice and going, where he at this here very minute? And how come he don't give a man a little breeze if he's so merciful? And Miss Rachel with her rice and greens saying, keep it up, just keep it up and see if a clap of lightning don't come there and knock the fool out of you. And Boo's saying, let him, I don't care, because a dead nigger is better than a live one any weekday and Saturday. I'm getting drunk, and say it again, and Steady standing in the middle of the road, hollering up in the air saying, come on and get me, see if I care, and falling down in the ditch and rolling out in the road and holding up the bottle so the Lord could see it, and rolling back in the ditch and rolling back in the road and drinking and holding the bottle up so the Lord could see it, and saying, I know you don't love nobody but white folks because you they God, not mine, and come on, though you lightning if you want, because no nigga ain't got no God, and the church going people closing their doors and windows to keep from hearing Boo blaspheming the Lord, but me and the rest of the children in the quarter like Boo, because he always bought us candy and cake. In just under a full page, that's barely a whole page in that book, Gaines presents an extraordinary portrait of human suffering, of rage, and of a deep despair that it hurts to read it. This depiction is made all the more effective because of Jefferson's closing comment, where he mentions that the innocent affection that he and the other children had for Boo came because he bought them candy and cake. Boo, who is otherwise alienated from the God-fearing members of the community. Those little sections, it doesn't advance the plot. It's part of giving us a sense of who Jefferson is, but that the portrait there is just so compelling, and Gaines is capable of giving us that in such a compressed space. Three other aspects of Gaines's fiction have struck me over the past several months as I've been going back through his work. The first is his skillful manipulation of setting as a way to establish key themes and motifs in his fiction. In his interviews, Gaines admitted feeling uncomfortable writing descriptive passages. He said several times that he was far more at ease with dialogue. In fact, in one interview, he speculated that if he had somehow ended up on the East Coast rather than in the San Francisco Bay Area during his coming of age as an artist, he might have become a playwright, where the emphasis is almost completely on dialogue instead of a novelist. Nonetheless, his handling of details such as domestic space, rooms and houses, weather, the time of day, all of those details reflect an author who is exceedingly purposeful in what you might call his world building. He doesn't give a lot of those details, but they're all significant. They all mean something. Think of the rain in the story Like a Tree from Bloodline. And then two other stories from Bloodline. Think about the biting cold in The Sky is Gray, with the little boy and his mother going to the dentist. And the weather in A Long Day in November is also very cold. At the opposite end, think of the heat and the dust from the corn and the brutal sun that's referenced over and over again in the novel In Love and Dust. In the novel In My Father's House, many of the key incidents take place at night. It's often raining, or if they're indoors, it takes place in crowded, enclosed spaces. All of those things do work to establish a certain tone and atmosphere. And finally, consider how the scenes in Jefferson's jail cell are so artfully staged and set up in A Lesson Before Dying. The second aspect of Gaines's writing that struck me is connected to something on which a lot of folks have extensively commented, and that's his ability to render the spoken word. He's a real master at conveying how people speak. The related feature that I began to notice in the fiction was how he manipulated silences. And the passage that I read involving Aunt Charlotte and the minister, there were important moments in their exchange where neither person said anything. And those are just as important. It's like listening to music. The rests, the pauses are just as important as when they're speaking. The quiet, unfilled spaces in the conversation that his characters have, they become charged, they become filled with meaning, even though there's no words there. At such times in his work, I found myself fascinated by how Gaines conveys the psychological complexity of characters whose speech is really sparse and whose vocabularies are often limited. In the hands of less talented, diligent, and attentive authors, those kind of figures could come across as lacking complexity, as lacking a rich internal life. This doesn't happen in Gaines's work. Those characters are presented very powerfully as extremely complicated in psychological terms. This is another feature of his fiction. It doesn't call attention to itself, yet it is difficult to carry off successfully, much less to do so without apparent strain. The third characteristic of Gaines's fiction brought home to me over the past months is the humor. It could be loud, raucous, and slapstick. If you read In Love and Dust, there is a party at a woman named Josie's place, and a fight breaks out. And it's like watching a chaotic, comic blow up on TV. Everybody's hitting everybody, things are breaking. Gaines can operate at that larger level dramatically. However, I found myself especially tickled by the less showy moments that can catch you off guard. There's a conversation in Miss Autobiography of Miss Jane Pittman that Jane has toward the end of the book with Jimmy and Jimmy's friend, who have come to ask her to take part in a protest march. And again, this is toward the end And this is Miss Jane speaking first. Going with you all, when? Where? When we get ready to move, he said. That's Jimmy. I'm 108 or 109, I said. What can I do but get in the way? You can inspire the others, Jimmy said. Somebody 108 or 109 inspire people, yes, ma'am. I never heard of nothing like this before, I said, but if you say so, and if I'm able to move, now there will be multitudes, that long-haired boy said. I was getting fed up with that boy. Boy, who you for, I asked him. Joe and Lena Butcher, he said. They teach you to talk like that? I said, ma'am. I just looked at him. That's rhetoric, he said. Well, I can do without your rhetoric here, I said. If you can't say nothing sensible, don't say nothing. He looked at me a while, feeling hurt now. Then he sipped from that lemonade. He looked at me again, still feeling hurt. Then he looked at Jimmy, want Jimmy to speak up for him, but Jimmy didn't offer him any help. If you've read Miss Jane Pittman, that's typical Jane, right? She does not bite her tongue. And calling out the young boy and his rhetoric is one of those humorous moments that enriches our sense of who Jane is. Gaines's first novel that I read you a section of is a decidedly somber novel, a somber book. It's not very relieved by the kind of humor that we see surfacing in his other fiction. However, late in Catherine Cormier, as we're steeling ourselves for an impending confrontation between Jackson, the young man who's come back to town, and Raoul, Catherine's controlling father, we know there's going to be a blow up. The tension is ratcheting higher and higher. Right at that moment late in the book, Gaines introduces a character named Jeanette, whom I don't think we've seen before in that book. She's a serious party girl, and she's one of the few people in the novel who dares to mess with Raoul. When she asks why Raoul and his daughters are arriving late, Raoul responds, I got to feed my mules, you don't mind? Jeanette comes back with, I quote, oh, gruff to you, gruff, gruff. When I first read that exchange, I couldn't figure out why Gaines would have Jeanette say gruff, G-R-U-F-F, unless it was Jeanette's way of accusing Raoul of acting gruff, right, in a gruff manner. But that didn't feel right. I mean, Gaines is more skillful than that. A page later, we see Jeanette joking with Raoul again. Oh, gruff to you, gruff, gruff. And at that point, it hit me. She's teasing the man by barking at him. It's like a child recklessly pestering a large and dangerous dog. Go up and just bark at him. 2 pages later, Jeanette does it one more time. Gaines writes, Jeanette danced across the room to Raoul, who stood against his sister's sewing machine. Gruff to you, she said, gruff, gruff to you. And she turned to dance toward the door, followed by her mother and her 2 cousins. Needless to say, Jeanette's pushing her luck with Raoul, who's definitely not in the mood. My father would describe Jeanette as someone who likes to floor show. What's so effective here is that the humor isn't gratuitous. It does work in this scene. Here, not only is the sequence amusing, but it serves by contrast to turn the volume up on the tension and the atmosphere of crisis even further. We get a break in the sense of foreboding that something horrible is going to happen. And this exchange gives it a little bit of a break, but only for a moment. And then it comes back, and the contrast increases the impact when that tension returns. My last 2 examples of Gaines's humor involve his depiction of children. Gaines has received considerable praise, and he deserves it, for his depiction of old folks. However, his youngsters are strikingly rendered as well. And not surprisingly, it's through how he handles their speech. And there are many examples. I just pick a couple of my favorites. In The Sky is Gray, if you remember, James has to prepare to go to town in cold weather with his mother because he has a toothache. And his brother Ty, they wake him up when they're preparing James. And here's the exchange. This is in James's mind. All right, Ani say, shaking me by the shoulder. Come on, today's the day. I pushed the cover down to get out, and Ty grabbed it and pulled it back. You too, Ty, Ani say. I ain't getting no teeth pulled, Ty say. Don't mean it ain't time to get up, Ani say. Hit it, Ty. Ty got up grumbling. James, you hurry up and get in your clothes and eat your food, Ani say. What time you all coming back? She say to Mama. That 11 o'clock bus, Mama say. Got to get back in the field this evening. Get a move on you, James, Ani say. I went in the kitchen and washed my face. Then I ate my breakfast. I was having bread and syrup. The bread was warm and hard and tasted good, and I tried to make it last a long time. Ty came back there grumbling and mad at me. Got to get up, he say. I ain't having no teeth pulled. What I got to be getting up for? Ty poured some syrup in his pan and got a piece of bread. He didn't wash his hands, neither his face, and I could see that white stuff in his eyes. You the one getting your teeth pulled, he said. What I got to get up for? I bet if I was getting the teeth pulled, you wouldn't be getting up. Shucks, syrup again. I'm getting tired of this old syrup. Syrup, syrup, syrup. I'm going to take with the sugar diabetes. I want me some bacon sometime. Go out in the field and work and you can have your bacon, Ani say. She stood in the middle door looking at Ty. You better be glad you got syrup. Some people ain't got that, hard times is. Shucks, Ty say. How can I be strong? I don't know too much about your strength, Ani say, but I know where you're going to be hot at. You keep that grumbling up. James, get a move on you. Your mama waiting. I ate my last piece of bread and went in the front room. Mama was standing before the fireplace warming her hands, and I put on my coat and my cap and we left the house. And then one second example, again, having to do with food and kids. I don't know if there's a connection. This is from the last story in Bloodline called Just Like a Tree, an amazing story. And again, Gaines is very skillful at inserting tonal shifts in his work, where you get some humor in an otherwise sad occasion, which is what's going on in Just Like a Tree. There are two young boys, Chucky and Ben O, and we're in Ben O's mind. And Chucky and Ben O are getting ready to act out. This sure is a beat up old house, Chucky say. I want me some eggnog, I say. Well, you ain't getting none, Grandma said from the fireplace. It ain't good for you. I can drink eggnog, I say. How come it ain't good for me? It ain't nothing but eggs and milk. I eat chicken, don't I? I eat beef, don't I? Grandma don't say nothing. I want me some eggnog, I say. Grandma still don't say no more. Nobody else don't say nothing neither. I want me some eggnog, I say. You gonna get an eggnog, Grandma say. Just keep that noise up. I want me some eggnog, I say, and I tend to get me some eggnog tonight. Next thing I know, Grandma done picked up a chip out of the corner and done sailed it back there where me and Chucky is. I ducked just in time and the chip catch old Chucky side the head. Hey, who that hitting me, Chucky say. Move and you won't get hit, Grandma said. I laugh at old Chucky over there holding his head, and next thing I know, here's Chucky done haul back and hit me in my side. I jump up from there and give him two just to show him how it feel, and he jump up and hit me again. Then we grab each other and start tussling on the floor. You Ben O, I hear Grandma say, you Ben O, cut that out. Yo, cut that out. But we don't stop because neither one of us want to be first. Then I feel somebody pulling us apart. What I ought to do is whip both of you, Miss Leola say. Is that what you don't want? No, ma'am, I say. Then shake hand. Me and Chucky shake hand. Kiss, Miss Leola say. No, ma'am, I say. I ain't kissing no boy. I ain't that crazy. Kiss him, Chucky, she say. Old Chucky kissed me on the jaw. Now kiss him, Ben O. I ain't kissing no Chucky. I say, no, ma'am. You kiss girls. And the next thing I know, Mama done tipped up back at me and done whopped me on the leg with Daddy Belt. Kiss Chucky, she say. Chucky turned his jaw at me and I kiss him. I almost wiped my mouth. I even feel like spitting. Now come back here and get you some eggnog, Mama say. That's right, spoil them, Grandma say. Next thing you know, they be drinking from bottles. Little eggnog won't hurt them, Mama say. That's right, never listen, Grandma said. If you gonna suffer for it, I'd be dead and gone, me. The shift in that time between the two boys and Grandma to finally Grandma and Mama is just masterfully staged here. It's not easy to kind of create that kind of narrative flow. And you also, just from that little bitty scene, you know that Mama is thinking, why me, Lord, right? Grandma on one side and these two kids on the other side. Reading Gaines's work this past summer and fall, as we've been coping with what seems like a never-ending series of crises, provided me both an escape into his literary artistry and at the same time considerable food for serious thought. And the times in which we're living surely played a role in my response to his work. I found myself especially moved by In My Father's House, a novel that doesn't get quite the attention it deserves, focused on issues of family, leadership, political activism, sacrifice, racial violence, community, and faith. In My Father's House speaks in fascinating ways to our current era of social conflict and change. Indeed, conflict and change constitute perhaps the dominant thematic through line in all of Gaines's fiction. In considering why his work is so compelling in our current moment, I came up with three things that I would describe as follows. First, one, humanity. Two, the tipping point. Three, everyday heroism. And I want to center my final comments on those three aspects of his work. One of the pressing questions of our time, I think, is how to be humane when confronting inhumane circumstances. In a 1974 interview, Gaines makes an observation that's relevant here. Gaines comments, I quote, "I want to be remembered as a guy who tried to write as well as he could and tried to be fair toward my characters and fair toward other people," unquote. For Gaines, a key component of humanity is to be fair, which I would suggest entails empathy. And his fiction manifests his remarkable capacity for empathy, for balance. Very rarely do we meet characters in his fiction who are demonized. Even those who represent forces arrayed against progressive change, even those characters are rendered as complex human beings. Two examples would be Albert Clouveau in Autobiography of Jane Pittman, Miss Jane Pittman. If you remember, he's the Cajun who goes fishing and talks constantly to Miss Jane, but he is also the person who kills Ned. And another character along these lines would be Bon Bon in Love and Dust. I hasten to add that such balanced depictions do not at all reflect any tendency to let these figures off the hook in terms of meeting the consequences of their actions. If you remember, Albert Clouveau goes mad right before his death in Miss Jane Pittman. Rather, this acknowledgement of their humanity, flawed as it is, reflects Gaines's commitment to maintaining our own humanity, one's own humanity, in the face of often dehumanizing circumstances. The balance that Gaines brings to his characterizations is remarkable, and it's something that is a constant throughout his career. The second item on my list is the tipping point, what I'm calling the tipping point. Like a number of Southern writers in American literature, Ernest Gaines focuses a great deal on the oppressive weight of the past, of history. There's often a numbing inertia that handicaps social interactions in his fiction, with a lot of characters feeling trapped or feeling stuck. Even individuals who appear to be privileged by long-standing racial protocols can feel constrained by the very rules that support their superior position. A number of the white characters in his work fall in that category. Two examples would be Bon Bon again, from In Love and Dust, and the character Frank Laurent in the story Bloodline. However, another constant in Gaines's fiction is the inevitability of change. And what makes his treatment of this issue so powerful and effective is that he's able to convey both the inevitability of change and also its utter unpredictability. That is, we don't know exactly what the tipping point might be that will bring about at least the start of long overdue shift in social relations, in race relations in the South. And I say bring about the start because Gaines isn't that concerned with the big dramatic events that we read about in history books. He hones in on the unexpected moments that anticipate and sometimes catalyze those events. So think about the ending of the Autobiography of Miss Jane Pittman. And I suspect that a number of you read the book and seen the movie featuring Cecily Tyson. Striving for a dramatically forceful climax, the film adaptation of the book shows us Jane walking alone to a white water fountain where she's about to break one of the racist rules of Jim Crow South. In the novel, Gaines focuses instead on what leads up to Jane's decision to take part in the march, despite the news of Jimmy's death. We don't know what will happen when the marchers get to town. What's important here are the factors that led Jane and other members of the Black community to go. The novel In Love and Dust ends with Jim, the narrator, taking the risk to leave the plantation where he's worked and lived for much of his life. The tipping point in his case was brought about through Marcus's ill-fated rebellion against attempts to control him. We don't know what waits for Jim, and we don't know if much at all will be different in how the plantation operates after he leaves. We just know that it won't be the same. And we also know that something fundamental has changed in Jim. Gaines's fiction reminds us that major political transitions inevitably result from myriad smaller but just as crucial alterations in individuals' lives. Gaines's fiction also shows us that change is messy, in large part because it makes people uncomfortable, even if it's ultimately in their own best interest. And messiness is manifested in Gaines's work in poignant moments of painful confrontation. One of the most memorable for me takes place in maybe what's my favorite story of his, and that's The Sky is Gray. And occurs in a dentist's office where there's a Black minister and a young Black man who get into a strained exchange about a belief and meaning. Here again, we see Gaines's commitment to balance. In other words, he's conveying the full humanity of both of those characters, even if push come to shove, at least through the character of the young boy, James, his sentiments seem to come down more on the side of the young man. To adopt a cliche from the 1960s, the political is always personal in Gaines's fiction, and it's a message that would be important for us to hold on to. My final item that I want to highlight is what I call everyday heroism. In an interview in 1973, Gaines remarks, "My men are always standing like they're waiting to go through a door," unquote. Although he's talking here about the male characters in the stories in Bloodline, I find his allusion to the individual on the brink of transition, of change, the individual about to move from one space into another. I find that that allusion applies across all his fiction. Just as we can rarely predict what will be the tipping point that will trigger change, we often don't know when an individual will decide to move, will take a chance, will do something that in retrospect we might call heroic. In Love and Dust, despite his frequent exasperation with Marcus, Jim tells the reckless young man toward the end that he admires his courage. Now, Marcus isn't trying to be heroic. He's simply striking out in opposition to forces that threaten to control him, to dehumanize him. This dynamic finds its especially powerful dramatization in the novel A Gathering of Old Men. I doubt that there was a single one of those men who got up in the morning, got the shotgun, went to meet in Matthew's house. I doubt there was a single one who knew when he got up in the morning that he was about to take a risk that would cost his life. I might add that while Gaines is especially focused on the vexed nature of Black manhood and masculinity in that particular novel, it's evident that Gaines sees the capacity for what I'm calling everyday heroism in his female characters as well. Miss Jane is just one example. And I would add that there are women on the porch at Matthew's house along with the old men. If you had told me 2 years ago that Confederate statues would be removed from the places of honor throughout the South, and that NASCAR would ban the rebel flag from its races, and that mainstream journalists would talk seriously about white privilege, I would have had a hard time believing you. And I saw in the news this morning that the statue of Stonewall Jackson will be taken down at Virginia Military Institute in the wake of recent reports of widespread racist and sexist abuse. Such unprecedented changes still leave us a long way from where we need to be. However, their importance should not be underappreciated. And as Gaines tells us, such developments are always grounded in an individual's willingness to take risks, to perform an act of everyday heroism. I want to finish today with one more statement by Gaines himself. I want to give him the last word. And this is from an early interview in 1972. And he was asked a question about Miss Jane Pittman, but his answer, I think, addresses some of the points that I've been trying to make. This is Gaines. There will always be men struggling to change, and there will always be those who are controlled by the past. In many cases, those who are controlled by the past can be just as human and sometimes more human than those who try to change things. Yet there must always be those who try to change conditions. There must always be those who try to break out of the trap the world keeps going in. Man must keep moving. In the case of T-Bob and Jackson, they were victims of the past. They tried their best to escape the influence of the past, and I think their attempt to do this can lead to someone else picking up where they left off. This is the kind of thing I'm doing in all my work. These characters make an attempt toward change, and some other characters might continue where they left off. But to break away from the past, from one philosophy to another, is a burden that one person cannot endure alone. Someone else must pick up from there and go on. Someone else must pick up from there and go on. Words to take to heart. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you so much. That was an amazing talk. We're now open the floor up to questions. If you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat and we will read them in the order we see them. And also on your screen, there's a little microphone symbol kind of on the left of your comment box. You're more than welcome to click that. It's called Grab the Mic. So you can actually ask your question or comments as you please. Dr. Harris would like to comment on the humor at the end of A Gathering of Old Men. Why do you think Gaines allows the rendition of that scene from the perspective of a white character?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I've thought about the resolution of that text because I would include how he handles the courtroom scene as well. Again, it may be his desire for balance. It may be that having presented almost a choir of Black men, each of whom has an individual story, it might have been difficult to figure out, okay, which one of these should I use to get the final word? I genuinely am not sure. I mean, this is one of those issues that I'd be curious to hear, your speculation about it. I do know that one of the striking things about that novel, maybe a little bit more than some of his other texts, is the attention he gives to the white characters, to Fix, to the men who have to come to terms with whether they're going to get together and go over to Matthew's house, which is going to lead to armed conflict. So, it's one of those novels where there's a lot more balance between the first person point of view coming from the white characters and the first person point of view coming from the Black characters. But a great question. Can't give a more definitive answer than that.
What I think is really interesting about Gathering Bold Men is Fix and his family, because they are grasping for a time that they know doesn't exist anymore. And you have a character, you have Fix and you have his, I can't remember his name, Salt, who understands that this doesn't exist anymore, but they have nothing else. Gaines does that with the Black and white communities in a way that I think is really beautiful, that shows it allows us as the reader to not be so narrowly focused. It gives us the opportunity to see the systemic problem affecting both of these communities and how the community's responses to these problems is impacting each other. Thinking about Of Love and Dust, thinking about Gathering Bold Men, thinking about the Autobiography of Miss Jane Pittman. I was thinking about that this morning, actually, how it's accountability.
Yep.
Albert didn't have to kill Ned.
Yeah, that's right.
They didn't go with him to kill Ned. They didn't threaten his family to kill Ned, and he knew he was being weaponized, and that's why Jane would never forgive him. He made a choice, and sometimes you can't say sorry enough to undo that choice. And so he plays with the concept of accountability in a way that's so relatable, and it's carried his work literally globally, which is so amazing about that. We have questions. My students have been asking the question all semester. One thing we've learned by using the center's collections, the first draft of the novel was entirely in Lou Dime's perspective for the Gathering of Bold Men.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Squires, who is an English professor here at the University of Louisiana, Lafayette. Firstly, thank you for bringing your students. We love working with students here. That's also really fascinating, how he spent so much time shifting those perspectives before he got to the final published version, which is also why, for everyone listening and watching, great reason to come to the archives, because a draft is not the same as the published book. We have about 6 minutes left. Thank you so much again, Dr. Yarborough. At the very bottom,
requesting the mic.
For the mic, we have a request for the mic.
Am I going to see the person?
Yes.
Hey there. What's up?
Chris Coffin made an observation about your reflection on tipping points and brought to mind the geological phenomenon called liquefaction. This is where a plot of the earth soaks up the water and can sometimes reach the point, often in an earthquake, where the solid earth suddenly turns into liquid and runs like water.
Yeah.
I think that's a really awesome connection to think about.
It's a perfect analogy. You don't know which of the stresses and strains will be the one that triggers a seismic event, figuratively and literally. So no, that's perfect.
Dr. Harris asked about Brady Sims. Would you comment on that text?
Another good question. When I was going through to pull excerpts, I had just encountered Brady Sims for the first time, maybe 3 or 4 months ago. Now, I don't know whether it's because I hadn't lived with that text as much, but when I was looking for examples, I was finding them in other texts. I think I might have put that book in conversation with the older men talking about choices that they've made in their lives, and the position of Brady Sims as a kind of both an outlier and yet a crucial participant in how that community defines itself might have fit in with some of that conversation. But I think it may even be something as simple as I hadn't lived with that book quite as much. I wish it was longer, but I mean, I feel that way about all of Gaines's work. But let me also add, I think the premise of a role that an individual is given or that takes in a particular society is really unusual and really, really powerful. And I'm not quite sure that I have seen something like that. We've seen people who were like the one, the chosen, or the potential leader in a community. But it actually reminds me, it may seem like a reach, but it reminds me a little bit of, Toni Morrison, where you get Sula, and Sula has a role in that community. She's a problematic figure, but that community needs her in order to maintain a coherent sense of balance about itself. So that just, it struck me, in fact, when I was reading the book, but it's a little bit far afield, but it gave me a purchase on a dynamic that really was unusual in terms of the rest of Gaines's fiction.
Dr. Squires asked, I wonder if Professor Yarborough has anything to say about Gaines's rendering of place. Of course, it's another celebrated aspect of his craft. Does reading his fiction from outside the South give you a sense of Southern Louisiana? Oops, hold on. It got another comment.
Yeah.
A sense of South Louisiana that might add or change the general sense of the settings.
Yeah. One of the challenges of teaching Gaines's work, and I've taught all my adult life in California, is that the students have a really challenging time understanding the racial protocols of Louisiana. We have to go back and look at Louisiana history. We have to talk about what Cajun means. We have to talk about color distinctions in a different way than we would talk about them elsewhere in the South. And it's hard. And the further we get historically from the time of Jim Crow and segregation, the more difficult it is, I think, for students to, without help, grasp the specificity of Gaines's work. And my sense of Gaines's handling of locale changed when I made my trip with the documentary folks to the area where it's set. It just changed. I mean, I know New Orleans. Nah, this is not New Orleans. And, that is hard to recapture for students. But, there are a lot of great works that demand that students do gain some outside information in order to grasp. Like most of the texts in the Harlem Renaissance, I have to give the students a map of Harlem, a map of New York City. I mean, they don't, it's so specific to the geographical topological layout that you just have to do extra work. And so Gaines is very seductive to my students because he's easy to read. And sometimes I think they underestimate the additional labor they need to perform in order to grasp things like what you're bringing up.
Right. Chris Coffin commented, I'm in Toronto and we're near Niagara Falls. A very thoughtful man in my life often remarks, on the millions of gallons of water that have fallen over the edge of the rocky escarpment. And yet there must have been, at some point, a first drop earlier than any other drop to fall over the edge. Seems like a good metaphor for tipping point as well. It really is. Yeah. And let me just say, I love these metaphors, these connections beyond literature to Gaines's work. That's one of the things I still say when I first started. I told students, I don't care what your degree is in, I can make a connection to Gaines, just come talk to me. So these are also really important. And I was thinking about Dr. Harris's question about the tragedy of Brady Sims. And I think actually the initial action by Brady Sims, it is waiting to go through the door. He had all of a sudden, everything, just like in every other situation in Gaines's novels, everything was in front of him and he had to make a choice. He had to take an action, and that action was in his mind to spare his son from this dehumanizing experience of Angola. Instead of letting his son be killed by people who genuinely did not care about his well-being or his humanity, he said he was going to do it himself in a public way because he thought that was the only chance he was going to get. Yeah. And taking that same action again in the end of the novel was him saying, this is my time now. Yeah. I make the rules. This is what has to happen to address whatever the bigger issue of the mechanization and the economical erosion of my community.
Right. One of the things that, and I know this may seem like another reach, although I think there's a logic to this one, I actually taught a seminar where I put Gaines and Alice Walker in conversation. This is a long time ago. We read half of it was Gaines and half Alice Walker. And how you're describing that particular dynamic actually reminds me of Grange Copeland, where it's an arc, a generational arc where you follow, in both cases, a man who makes certain choices about his offspring, and there are consequences, unanticipated. And the novel is rounded by or framed by those kinds of choices.
Fun fact, we have a letter from Alice Walker asking Dr. Gaines to be her mentor. So they were friends. They knew each other. They honed their craft together, which is also something really beautiful about the Black Arts Movement, even though Dr. Gaines is not considered a part of the Black Arts Movement. Not sure why, but there's those similarities that flow between all these authors. Because they're all trying to make the same point, and they're just approaching it from very different ways. And Gaines's approach of the rural South, not just the rural South, but Southern rural Blackness, and how that, and tying it back to Russian literature and everything else, shows not only the globalness of these experiences of oppression and change and caste systems and things of that nature, but the humanizing in a way, as for people who are not from the South, they can identify with it. in a way that I think is really important right now to think about what's happening around us. It's really easy to put everyone in these boxes.
Yeah.
And we're mad at that box, and we're mad at this box, and we're mad at the other box. And we're not taking the time to look at people as individuals sometimes to figure out what the crux of the problem actually is.
Mhm.
We like boxes.
Agreed.
Are there any more questions? Well, while we wait, I would like to take a moment one more time to thank everyone who participated in this, our first virtual Gaines lecture series, our second virtual event in general. This will be posted on the Ernest J. Gaines website under our open resources page. If you haven't had a chance to see it, it is a great site. We share student work and other resources associated with Dr. Gaines's work, and we have a video library that we're creating. Also on the website, we started an academic blog where we are highlighting hopefully up and coming Gaines scholars, our GAs, and other researchers who have engaged with Dr. Gaines's work throughout Louisiana and globally. And again, I would like to thank everyone. Thank you for your support. It's with your support we're able to do these kind of events. We are a nonprofit organization, and I will drop our donation link. With your donations, we're able to offer honorariums and host these kind of projects that will then be able to be used for future references for all of the scholars who visit the center either virtually or in person. While we're sad we could not have everyone here, we are very glad that we were able to still have this event. And again, I would like to thank Dr. Richard Yarborough for participating. I would like to thank everyone who tuned in to watch us stream today. And if you have any questions, please feel free to contact us here at the Ernest J. Gaines Center. My name is Shaylin Woods. You can contact us at Ernest Gaines Center at louisiana.edu. Or you can contact myself at shaylin.woods@louisiana.edu, and I will put my email address in the chat box. If you have any research questions, comments, observations, or fun facts you want to share with us, we love talking to people. We love visitors, even virtual. Thank you all.
Okay.
Hi, everyone.
Thank you. Yeah.